Thank you very much for joining the stream. We have a lesson and then 5 games today, so I just wanted to get through that. And yeah, we can start off with the Slav. The Slav lesson, I think, should be pretty interesting. It's an opening that I know how to play, so we can take it from the black side of things and see kind of what the positions that arise are. So the Slav is defined as d4, d5, c4, c6. And here there's basically a number of different moves that white has to play. What I see by far the most frequently is knight f3 and knight c3. I do occasionally see pawn takes, and I do occasionally see e3. Sometimes bishop to f4, that can happen too. Maybe we should check out bishop to f4 because there is probably a reason why that's played so infrequently. But it is kind of an intuitive response for white out of white out of the London system. Basically white trying to transpose the Slav into the London system. One of the main benefits for for white, one of the main benefits for black against an early bishop to f4 is the ability to like not be attacked on c7. Hey, good morning, Jonathan. Thanks very much for joining the stream. We were starting off today with Slav and then 5 viewer games. So bishop f4. I'm kind of curious about why bishop f4 is considered to be not so strong. Basically here, this eval is not too terrible. I don't necessarily understand the weaknesses of why bishop f4 shouldn't be played here. It doesn't have the natural target on c7, but I do think that it's a fine move to play. So knight f6, e3, bishop f5, knight c3, e6. This doesn't look incorrect to me. Basically white's still up half a pawn in terms of positional compensation. I think this is fine. So I guess I don't know. I mean, it seems it seems somewhat like anti-thematic, I guess, but I don't really see what's so terrible about playing bishop f4 after the Slav is played. Anyways, I don't play the white side of this, I play the black side of this, and what I see the most frequently is like knight c3, that makes sense, knight f6, and then basically you have to make the determination whether you want to play the Slav or the semi-Slav. The definition of the Slav is basically this structure, d5, c6, c7, b7, and basically, this is solid. It doesn't disrupt this bishop's development. It's not quite as solid as, basically it's not quite as solid as the semi-Slav. With the semi-Slav, you get this kind of triangle structure. And basically with the triangle structure, you're pretty safe as black. I mean, there's not really any vulnerabilities for white to attack. White ends up posting sometimes on e5, but you can usually get to that with knight d7, knight takes e5, and then bishop f4 facing off against a bishop d6 threat. You have to be a little bit careful because sometimes there's discovered checks on bishop to d6, but overall, this opening ends up playing out pretty well for black. There are problems that emerge with your dark squared bishop, but it's not usually particularly important that you develop your dark squared bishop. Usually white tries not to help you out with pawn takes d5, e takes d5. If white does take on d5, then you take with the e pawn and get a comfortable development for your bishop. But overall, nothing too terrible. I don't know. So c6, bishop f4 is unusual. Most common are these knight moves. I think they play out pretty similarly. This is considered to be the modern line. But they usually transpose. The 3 knights variation is by far the most common outcome of playing the Slav. So e6, e3, knight d7, and you just have this there's some that are explicitly labeled the triangle system. There are some that don't explicitly label the triangle system. But overall, this triangle system, this triangle here, this basically holds up well for black. There's not really many problems that occur. And black can do things like play queen a5, queen or bishop to b4, and have kind of sustained threats on e1. The dark squares for white or the dark squares for black are a place where they can develop comfortably. But basically, you end up in a situation where you are like somewhat cramped. Your light squared bishop is somewhat hard to develop. But usually this just transposed into black safely castling and then black expanding on the queen side. It's a solid opening for black. Basically this type of formation is really solid, and you do have to be careful about tactical stuff. Why not bishop to f5, London? Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's a good question. So in the pure Slav, you can play, you can play bishop to f5. Like this is the three knights variation with bishop to f5. Sometimes there are issues that occur with bishop f5 and queen to b3. So like on queen to b3, so say bishop f5 and then queen to b3 here. You do need to be careful. There's some situations here where white can exert a lot of pressure on the d5 pawn and the b7 pawn. But here, like, queen b6 is probably the best, c5, and then queen takes b3 is a common play. Basically, there's sort of like a trap-like thing here. A takes b3, knight a6, e4, knight b4. But black's basically going to be fine, and this situation for white is usually pretty good. I mean, getting this extra mobility for this rook on the a file, that can be pretty helpful. So let's go back. It's a really good question, so I want to make sure that I get to it and give it a good answer. So say like knight f3, and then bishop f5. This is fine. It's the bishop. I guess it's called the bishop's game. Didn't know exactly what it was called, but e3, knight f6, knight c3, e6, and basically, if you're careful, you can end up in a good situation with that London-like bishop. Queen b3 is the persistent threat that you always have to calculate against, but it's usually fine. Queen b3, queen b6, c5, queen takes b3, a takes b3. And there's some lines where basically white starts trying to exploit this pin from the a1 pawn to the a8 rook. The best way to deal with this is to get early development of knight d7, b4. This, I think, will be a line where that happens. Bishop e7, b5, castles, and then basically, black has some choice of how to deal with this. But this quick development, attempting to exploit pins on a8 can actually get pretty dangerous. If white expands hard on the queen side, there can be difficulties for white against black here. So c4, c6, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, e6. This type of formation tends to be the most common. But bishop f5 London system formation, I think that's fine. The only thing that you have to worry about is queen b3, and then potentially if you play queen b6 to run up against queen b3, worrying about the defense of your a8 rook. We can take a look. I can try to find a position where this goes wrong for black. That might be helpful. Overall, it's fine though. You shouldn't be afraid to play bishop f5. You should just play it frequently enough that you sort of understand that there can be threats on your a1 rook against your a8 rook. That basically yeah, no. I mean that's the thought. So it's fine. Is the main point. You can definitely play it. Let's say bishop f5 here. Here it's a very common line. If you get into this type of situation, usually this, relatively delayed bishop f5, this is safe. I mean, you'll be fine here. I'm going to try to play queen b3, and I'm going to try to steer towards this this queenside pawn expansion for white that I was talking about. c5, queen takes b3, a takes b3. But the common theme is that white will try to start advancing. Basically, white can kind of freely play b5 here without there being, where black basically shouldn't take. So here, like, say, e6, knight c3, bishop e7, b5. A key part of this is that black can't comfortably take the b5 pawn. If black takes on b5, he worsens his pawn structure, and this pawn is easily retaken. Basically, one of the things about it is this doubled pawn. Basically this doubled pawn on the b file is good for white. So, sorry, it's good to remove this doubled pawn, from the b file for white. If black castles and white decides to take, or black decides to take, then white just comfortably recaptures, and then he has b4, and basically this plays out fine. Hey, good morning, Sam Sejwani. Thanks for joining the stream. Thanks for being here. But yeah, so basically here, castles, bishop d2, c takes b5. This is the c takes b5 case that I was talking about. This isn't particularly good for black. The bishop just recaptures. Black's pawn structure is now fractured. White can play something like b4, but overall, I don't really think this is something that Black should be shooting for. I think Black should leave this pawn alone and basically, play moves like bishop to g6, knight to e8, knight to c7, and Black will overall be fine. Shouldn't be any issues here. Just a comfortable position for Black against White. This main line has the pawn taking, but I don't think that's the correct strategy. I think just ignore this, leave the structure as is. Potentially, you might be able to play moves like a5 and a6. You'd need to find a defender for a6. But overall, I think this is this is generally a pretty good point for Black. Black could play bishop takes b5, knight takes b5. It's fine. Maybe rook to c8 and b6 could be an undermining strategy, but I don't think that pawn takes b5 is ever particularly good for Black. It's interesting. It's an interesting opening. But these types of queenside expansions happen more with this bishop to f5 move. Bishop to f5 is playable, but just expect the game to go into that kind of play, and then don't take on b5. But basically, if you decide to play bishop to f5, expect queen b3, face off against that with queen b6, and then expect a game in which White is expanding on the b file with his pawns. Bishop f4, knight f6, e3, bishop f5, knight c3. Overall here, this is basically the kind of defense that I was mainly thinking about. This is the semi-Slav, comes to exist after the Slav pretty frequently. Bn d7, queen d6, but the b5 line, bishop to f5 lines tend to involve that queen to b3, queen to b6, and then retaking on b6 general theme. Knight c3, g6, e3, bishop g7. Overall here, White's doing fine. Basically, this provides a solid defense for Black. White has the initiative. And basically, as Black, your decision is kind of how to develop in the most efficient way, and then whether or not you can get a pawn break with either e5 or c5. That's what Black's playing for here. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. Those are the themes of the game. E3, let's look a little bit more at this triangle structure, and then we'll move on to the game analysis. E6, knight c3, and basically, these structures are just really solid for Black. If you play a structure like this, if White beats you, it's going to be really far into the game. Your main themes are going to revolve around things like knight d7, castles, potentially moving to bishop to b4 and knight to e4 could be a later threat. But just straightforward, kind of relatively restrained development. The ability to play b6 against pawn takes c5. And overall, Black's going to be doing fine. Knight f3, castles, queen c2. Black's just fine here. There's no problems. Yeah, Queen's Gambit declined with 2 g6. Sure, we can take a look. C4 and then g6. Yeah, that's interesting. I think, I don't know. I don't see any particular problems with this. The bishop developing on this diagonal is interesting. But yeah, say knight c3 or bishop. Yeah, I don't think that this is too terrible. I think this is fine. You frequently have the ability to transpose here. So say like knight f3, bishop to g7, g3. Ideas like e6, pawn takes c4, knight f6. Black's doing fine. Yeah, sure. If you're more comfortable with the bishop developed on the g7 square, then yeah, definitely take a look at that opening, Sam Sejuani. Like that's completely playable. There's no reason why that's not playable. Here, the most common move, bishop to g2. Basically, yeah, this looks fine. Yeah, no, you're completely right about that. C6 or castles, yeah, it can transpose into the Grunfeld. With this early bishop to g7, yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah, no reason why not. You have to get your knight out. You have to get your knight to f6. You have to avoid the immediate pawn takes d5. I'm sort of curious about pawn takes d5 here. I think the eval's liking that. Here, queen takes d5. I'm sure you're fine as black. I guess maybe you delay queen takes d5 here. So say knight f6 first, then knight c3, and then you're shooting for a Grunfeld. So I guess, yeah, especially that Grunfeld transposition that you're talking about. You can play that Grunfeld transposition against pawn takes d5, knight takes d5, knight c3. Makes sense to me. c5, rook b1. Yeah, overall, I think black is fine. This looks good. So, anyways, interesting situation. Thanks. Thanks very much for sending that suggestion. And if you play that 2g6 line, you can transpose it into the Grunfeld, particularly if there's the immediate pawn takes d5. Interesting. Cool. On to the next game. Okay. Let's take a look. So this is kind of an unusual game. This is an early e3 by white. d4, knight c6. I guess, I don't know. I'm not particularly worried about this. e3, d4, knight c6. Looks fine. Knight f3, bishop g4, c4, e6. Yeah, I think white's doing just fine here. I don't think that this, this opening, if you transpose this into a d4 opening, e3 looks less out of context. So e3 might equalize immediately. Let's see, e3 almost leads to equality after move 1. But e3, d5, d4, knight c6. Overall here, white's doing fine. Knight f3, knight f6, white's fine. Moves like bishop b5 might be playable. But I think just transposing this into a general queen's pawn game, that's probably the wisest. I'd look at c4, sure. I don't know. Now you're just basically playing a queen's pawn game. c4, e6, knight c3, bishop to b4. This should generally be pretty good. Queen's Gambit Orthodox leads to problems with black. Basically these pawns getting developed is kind of not so strong. So pawn takes c4, pawn takes d5. Overall, I'm generally liking white's position. No issues. So bishop to b4, white's fine. Maybe queen a4, knight to e5 can be played. But yeah, interesting situation. Bishop takes c4, white is fine. So yeah, I don't know the best way to capitalize on e3. I think it's kind of difficult to see, how white or black can avoid d4. So e3 can really just kind of be played as a transpositional type opening. Basically d4, e3 with the moves reversed. That's not terrible for white. It is unchallenging. It will basically allow black to play whatever opening that he's interested in. e5 is kind of interesting. Here c4 becomes the most common. It becomes the English. d4 here is kind of interesting. I guess in this situation, probably e takes is the most common. E takes, d5, knight f3. It's a French exchange. Nothing too frightening there. But yeah, all right, we can go through this game. E3, d5, d4. And basically here, white's, I think, looking fine. Queen b8 is an unusual move. This middle game is, I guess, slightly better for black. White sort of lagged on development. Nothing too frightening. d5, sure. Yeah, no, I think it is inferior. I don't think it's the right move to be playing, Privulo. So, yeah, I think you're right about that. I think e3 on the first move is a basically it's slow. Yeah, it's basically playing d4. I think that when someone plays e3, they're probably playing for practical compensation, but it's really up to them. This often transposes into a d4 opening. And white's looking fine here. No issues. Queen to b8. This all looks good for white. Pawn takes, pawn takes. Yeah, no worries. Bishop takes d4, queen d8, bishop to d5. Yeah. But yeah, so queen to c3, a5, bishop to b2. Um, yeah, pawn takes, queen b to g6, rook e8. Um, yeah, eh, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, no. So e3 is kind of a yeah, we're doing it early. Um, but yeah, e3, d5, knight f3. Um, so yeah, e3 is not the soundest. You don't want to be too fat about it, but the thing about it is like you can basically play early d4. But the thing about d4 and knight f3 here is it's basically playing into it's basically playing into early it's an early d4 move. And basically with an early d4 move, you're transposing into an opening. It's a little bit ridiculous. It's kind of like, why would you play in an inefficient way? But if it's fun for you, then feel free. Like you might get a psychological advantage from playing e3, but it's I don't know. It's one of those things. It's like it's very childish sort of to play e3. But if you want to if you want to relive your childhood where like you're playing kind of these fat openings, it's kind of it's up to you. I would say it's inefficient, but yeah, e3, d5, d4, knight c6, knight f3, knight f6, and basically white's looking fine. Just no problems. Knight c3, bishop to g4, bishop e2, queen to b8. And overall, this is silly, but it ends up working pretty well for it ends up working pretty well for white. As long as you can transpose it into something normal, you're looking pretty fine here. E3, D4 against D5 and knight C6. White's looking fine. There's no issues with this. The main point is to prioritize the is basically to prioritize the early D4. But I don't know. I guess what I would say here is, if you turn it into a D4 opening, play it in a thematically consistent way with the D4 opening. C4, pawn takes C4, bishop takes C4, and white's looking basically fine. These kinds of openings, they're beginner moves. I haven't played them in 20 years, 25 years, but if you want to transpose it into a D4 opening and you want to play in this specific way, then go ahead. It doesn't make it's actually playable in this case. Thematically, it doesn't particularly make sense, but this is not really an issue. I think c4 is probably a better idea. I don't know. Bishop to b5 works. C4 works. If you just if you're not intimidated by playing a kind of ridiculous opening, you're gonna come out in a reasonable place here. This isn't like playing f3. F3 it's not really a a move that you can make, but e3 is a move that you can transpose into a reasonable opening. So rook b1, b6, knight to g5. Bishop takes. White's fine. So, depending on what you'd like to do, feel free. But the main point is, if you're interested in playing an opening that's fun for you, feel free to play an opening that's fun for you. You could probably play this up to a pretty high level. It doesn't transpose into anything too stupid. This works out fine. Queen d8, d5, knight to e5, bishop to b3. White's fine. No problems. Pawn takes, king h1, rook takes, queen c4. White's looking fine here. Nothing to think about. Yeah, overall, white's good. Yeah, so white wins out of a, or sorry, whoa, this shifted. Um, sorry, let's take a look. Knight 2, g5, h6, bishop takes, pawn takes g5. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Is it fun for people to play me? Because I think that they might, I don't know, if you just end up, like, I'm super happy to play that tournament too. I think it's a great idea, Filion, first. So definitely feel free to play it. I think it's, I think that'll be really fun. But the main thing is, I can play it if it's helpful, but I don't know if is it that much fun for you to play it, or like is it more fun if I play in it? Okay, all right. If it's fun, I can play. Yeah. So if you put it 10 a.m. on Monday, sure, I can do that. Um, uh, do I suggest going for the Stonewall Attack? I don't really know what that is, to be completely honest. Stonewall Attack is kind of um, is Stonewall. I assume Stonewall Attack is like F4, right? To be completely honest, like yeah, E3 F4, is that the Stonewall? I'm not familiar. Like this is a Dutch type opening, so I assume that that's similar to the Stonewall. But um, uh, yeah, 10 a.m. is good. No issue. Um, so yeah, so F4, Knight C6, Knight F3, Bishop to G4, Bishop to B5. Overall, white's looking fine. This is sort of a Dutch type thing. But yeah, I'm happy to play. Interesting. All right, let's load it up. Let's load it up, Sam Sishwani. Anyways, in terms of this game, E3 is kind of an unusual opening. If you play E3, you're gonna have to transpose it into D4, or you're gonna have to end up in something kind of ridiculous. But I don't know, D5, Knight F6. Once this knight gets hung for no reason, I feel like white should just be in good shape with tactically accurate play. I think white should be fine, but white does need to be careful. These open lines of attack on your king are dangerous. I think if in this situation, just leave your king side alone. If you leave your king side alone here, you should be fine. If you won't end up in a disastrous situation. Like the real disaster is if you play like F4, pawn takes F4, pawn takes F4, and then threats on of rook G1, something like that. But that seems like a while. How about making it like I don't know. I mean, we'll see how many people are interested in playing Aphelion, but how about we set it up for a 1 hour arena and go from there? If it's too little time, we can do another. But let's say 1 hour. Let's keep it 1 hour, and then that should be we'll see. We'll see. I don't know. Like 1 hour game in 5 or something. That sounds good. Yeah. So pawn takes, rook takes, and overall here, once white dismantles the king side, the whole nation collapses. This is kind of ridiculous. Like this, basically F4, pawn takes F4, queen to G6. This whole thing falls apart once white starts playing with fire here. So F4, pawn takes F4, and then basically threats on the king side are going to become dangerous. Just leave it alone. Just leave it alone. Don't be ridiculous. Like there's so little to be gained from playing these aggressive moves on the king side. Anyways, I want to take a look at Sam Sishwani's game. Thanks for basically sending that game over, Sam Sishwani. Really appreciate it. Let's take a look. Cool. So we're in an interesting situation. This is not the position. But yeah. Okay, Stonewall Attack, just so we know. Interesting. So Stonewall Attack comes with F4 and D4. Interesting way to set that one up, Sam Sejwani. But that is a good demonstration. That's what this looks like as white side. I like that. Is that drawn from like a fen? That's actually really cool, Sam Sejwani. I like how you sent that over. Anyways, these pieces, this D4, F4, E3, C3, B2. Overall, this structure is going to be, this structure is going to be pretty good for white. This is interesting. I assume this comes with the precaution that there's not going to be a a D4, D5 push here, or E4, E5 push here. But yeah, this type of Dutch structure where you're trying to get where you're trying to get E4, E5. But yeah, the Black King is lonely. Yeah, Black King's kind of pathetic here. That's true. But what can you do? It's yeah. But it's cool. I like the way that you set that up, Fen, and yeah, very interesting stuff. Yeah, all right. So now I know. You taught me something. Sam Sejwani. I really appreciate it. Always feel free to send in whatever you like. Yeah, Black should Black should have resigned a long time ago in this situation. But yeah, whatever. He just keeps going. So what you gonna do? Yeah. It's funny. I like it, Sam Sejwani. That was actually very illustrative. I liked it a lot. Thanks. So anyways, white's looking pretty solid. B2, C3, D4, E3, F4. Now I know. This is the Sam Sejwani. The Sam Sejwani's a good demonstration of the. Well, no, it's a good question, Kiro. The thing is, I'm not doing this for, I'm doing this to make teaching free. If teaching is free, I think the world's in a lot better place. So, I think the main point here is really just to do the material. If nobody sent in a game, I would just do, just do instruction material, Kiro. Yeah, this is a good demonstration that Sam Sejwani sent in. But don't worry about it. I have plenty of material. The main point is the main point. It's a really good question, Kira. I'm moving more towards a format where I'm only going to need 3 games per stream as opposed to 6. Yeah, no, of course. Of course, Sam Sejwani. But yeah, no. Thank you for sending it. It was a really no. I should. This is a really good illustration of the opening structure that you were trying to demonstrate. This is this is basically an early, an early Dutch structure. This is the Stonewall Attack. I didn't know exactly what you meant by the Stonewall Attack, so this is an excellent way to illustrate it. Stonewall Attack basically looks like the Stonewall defense from Black here, except it's white playing F4 and D4 as opposed to Black playing F5 and D5. So anyways, really good. The thing about playing viewers, I think it's just fine. But yeah, the thing about it is I'm super happy with no viewers. If it is, I think one of the things that is, again, I'm talking about this too much, but you guys keep bringing it up. The thing about it is, every kind of basic chess course has exactly the same curriculum. If one day nobody showed up, I'd just start, I would just start streaming that basic curriculum. I should probably just stream that basic curriculum and make it completely free anyways. I'm really just tempted to do that, but every beginner chess course, every, course that's taught to, beginners in groups of, 20 or 25, where you're not really even asking that many questions, you don't really have, it's all draws off of exactly the same material. And if it comes to the situation where, I had the free time, oh yeah, for sure. No, I mean, I took an after-school chess program. I took an after-school chess program, and basically, they teach the same stuff. It's king space, king pawn. It's how to develop. It's really basic stuff. They're all exactly the same. And the crazy thing about it is, people charge, the government frequently a lot of money for that. Like, there's many places where people are charging a completely universal curriculum. They're charging the government a lot of money for it. And they're charging parents money for it, parents who need to support their kids with whatever they can. They're they're totally the same, Kira. Are you kidding me? They charge the government a lot of money for something that could easily be for free, universally available online. So if any time people stop, people stop coming, I'll just make a free chess course. There's no reason that that's a curriculum that the government should be paying tens of millions of dollars for. It's ridiculous. That course should be available for free. It should be promoted everywhere, and basically it should be given to schools so that the science teacher can put it on the screen and not have to charge specialists to come in and basically charge nonprofit institutions and governments money to have a universally available chess curriculum. That's ridiculous. It should be free and available, and no one should be charging a cash-strapped government for chess lessons. It's insane. So anyways, sorry to get into that, Kiro. No, I think it should. Yeah, well, yeah, see, you're absolutely right. There is plenty of content for beginners. The crazy thing is, why is that content getting taught to. Why is that content, getting taught at a cost? That's the part that I don't get. So anyways, I'm happy to make, lessons for both. But you're making a really interesting point, Kiro. Well, how is it possibly sustainable that that you would be able? Well, maybe, sure. There's some truth to that, Kiro. But how has marketing been so good that parents are willing to pay tons of money for something that should be free? But the thing about rich parents specifically is that it's not always rich parents. It's often the government. It's often the government, and it's often charities that are paying this money for completely available information. They're literally paying $180 an hour for some specialist to come in, give a lecture to 25 people. I've seen it because I've seen to some degree the finances of nonprofit institutions that have paid lessons for basic chess lessons. Anyways, you raised interesting points, Pravilo. My point is just to make chess lessons completely free for everyone. I think that I don't know anything about the St. Louis Chess Club, but all I know is that chess lessons should be free and available for everyone, and it's basically it's not morally justifiable to me to continue to charge nonprofit institutions money for something that that's for something that is available for free and can be available totally for free. That seems unethical to me. Anyways, you're always prodding me on this one, Kira. I apologize. Get very distracted. On to the next game. Okay, sorry about that. Knight c3, d5. This is the Van Geet opening. This is actually surprisingly playable for white. Knight c3 facing off against d5, e4, e5, knight takes d5. And basically here, this situation ends up being pretty solid for white. Knight c3 faces off against d5, knight takes d5, bishop to c5. This is not their strongest response for black. The book response for black in this situation, and one that provides black equality, is e4. E4, knight e2, e5, knight g3. This is how to play the Van Geet opening. Van Geet opening is interesting. It's kind of an offbeat opening for white. It's another one where basically it's similar to the last game where you can transpose e3 into d4. It's basically an offbeat opening. Knight f3, knight f6, queen f6, c3, bishop to g4, bishop e2. Overall here, white looks fine. And basically, this idea, d3, bishop to g5. This will end up playing out pretty solidly as white. Castles, b4, b6, a4, a6, b5. This is a pretty, this was a pretty ineffective way for black to defend against this. But yeah, knight c3, d5, e4, e5. Knight takes d5. Yeah, right. It can turn into the Scandinavian if basically white. The thing about it that differs from a Scandinavian is that it has the knight defending knight on c3 defending d5, e5, e takes d5. Sure, now it's sort of the Scandinavian, but yeah, you're making a very good point, Sam Sejwani. I appreciate it. Yeah, with this knight takes d5, bishop c5, knight f3. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, white's looking fine. So the equalizing line here, the best line is d4. c6 can also be played. This turns into the Caro-Kann. It's really just a transpositional opening. But I think one of the issues about it for white is that basically it sort of forfeits control of what opening you're playing to black. Knight c3 doesn't make any immediate threats. e4 doesn't make any immediate threats either, but at least with e4 you're sort of steering into a limited range of possibilities. With e4 you're looking at either e5, d5, c5, d6, knight f6, g6. So you're basically, I consider d6 and g6 to sort of be the same opening. So there's really 5 options here. E4 instead. E4, basically prompts something. Knight c3, and basically black has access to pretty much whatever opening he'd like to play as black. He has access to both c5, or he has access to both d5 and e5 openings here. So basically, if you play e4, right, your opponent can only play about 5 openings, like I just said. e5, d5, c5, knight f6 potentially, g6, d6. So 6. So this is Van Geet, 1 knight c3. But the thing about it is, with knight c3, black can play all the openings that would normally come out of d5, all the openings that would normally come out of e5, and all the Sicilian openings. So he basically has access to all of the opening structures against both one white d4 and white e4. So you're basically, there's nothing particularly wrong with this, but the issue is that you're transposing it into, basically black's complete choice of opening. E5 is an idea, d5 is an idea, c5 is an idea. And but the actual best play, my understanding of this opening is the best play is e4, d4, knight to e2, and then like e4, knight to c2. Yeah, no, I think that's right. So knight to g3, knight to f6, bishop to c4, c5, knight f3. This is the, I guess they call this the closed Scandinavian. I've never heard of this referred to that way. I guess that could work. But white retains the advantage here. This is sort of the main line, and I think kind of the solidest line for black is that d4, d5, e5 structure. But black has complete choice. If you're a Sicilian player and you see one knight c3, you can play c5. You can also play moves like e4. This will transpose into the closed Sicilian. Early here, black can play things like g6, e4, knight f3, d4, bishop to e3, bishop to c4, and basically here white's looking, white's looking fine. This is you know, this is good for white, I think. Um, Anyways, knight c3, d5, e4, e5, knight takes, bishop c5, knight f3, and basically here white's solid. This was not the strongest way for black to play against this, and with this played, now white can play moves like bishop to c4, knight to f6. Let's take a look at bishop to c4. This leads to some crazy gambit lines. Here I think probably, I don't know, castles maybe. But you have taken your opponent out of theory, and in this particular case, with black, black basically gambited the d5 pawn for not much of a reason. Yeah, b4, ace, b6, b4. This was a pretty aimless defense by black. Hey, thank you very much for the follow, Sting. I really appreciate it. But yeah, this very quickly got out of control. So let's see. Bishop f3, g4, pawn takes, bishop takes, and yeah. Threats on h3, maybe queen to f3 instead. None of this is going to work out particularly well for white. This attack got too aggressive, so it's kind of interesting. Black really ignored the attack on the queen side, and then white really ignored the attack from black on the king side. This g5 stuff got really inappropriately dangerous. So yeah, I don't know. Knight c3, d5, e5, knight takes d5. Basically, white won a lot of, white won a lot of area here. Yeah. All right, so how did white misstep? Black basically plays this opening, gambits d5 for no reason, and then white has a solid 1.5 point lead. Pawn takes a6, bishop takes a6, king to b8, rook to b1, and basically here white's looking fine. I think the move is bishop e2. H5, I don't know. D4 I think is white's best response, but yeah, I don't know. In terms of having this situation, deteriorate, I think I don't know. Is pawn takes? I assume pawn takes g4 is never playable, right? Yeah, it's definitely not. I'm sort of thinking of ways that white can effectively back against this, back against this pawn storm. Maybe d4, maybe d4, and then queen to d3 here. So yeah, so I think, black is gonna get this aggressive attack on the white king side here. D5, d4 I think is a better idea. D4, say bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, c5, queen to d3 maybe. But overall, this just opening this pawn, basically opening up this king side for black is just better than is better than white. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're totally right about that, Sam Sejwani. Getting this attack on white's king side was very helpful for black here. So a4, a6, b5, knight to a5, b takes a6, pawn takes a6. White should be able to make something of this king side. I think bishop takes a6 is correct. and I sort of like all of this. I think the issue, basically, as long as white's the one attacking, things are fine. Black's allocating moves black's allocating moves for to defense here, and h5 I think is an error. Or no, sorry. This response to h5 I think is an error. I think h5 and g5 make sense for black. But basically, this sort of puts a timer on white against black here, right? So I think moves like d4 and then pressure on g5 might be an idea. D4 puts pressure on a lot of stuff. This is for tactical reasons. I think this is probably the best. Bishop takes g5. Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's definitely true. I think opening up this H file becomes very dangerous for white. So I think sidestepping that is better. The best way to do this, I think, is d4. D4 puts this immediate threat on g5. When d4 gets played, basically, what's particularly good about d4 is it also puts threats on e5. It also restricts this development. But the main point of d4 and d3 is to put threat on this g5 pawn, because the hook for white is h3, and if d4 here, bishop takes f3, and I think you might be. I'm wondering if you can play. Maybe you can't play that either. Darn. But here I think g takes f3, and you can sort of maintain the closeness of this kingside. If on g takes f3, g4. Then f4, and then basically you have to play with an open kingside as white, but you can play king h2, rook g1 quickly enough. Overall, this is interesting. Knight to c3, knight to d5, e4, and basically white's able to capitalize by this weak attacking on the queen side. Pawn takes a6, pawn takes a6, b takes a6, rook b, king b8. Rook b1. This is good for white, and really, but it is kind of worth paying attention to in the broader context of this game. How out of control this, attack gets for black. It really only takes like 3 pawn moves, h5, g5, and g4, to basically dismantle the whole white kingside here. White needs an idea. Things like pawn takes might work. That might be a slower response. Or that might be a response that would work. Like here, like g5, pawn takes, bishop to g4, maybe. But I don't know. This is going to require tactically accurate defense. I'm going to slow down for a second and actually try to figure out what the correct defense is for white. I like d4. I like d4 because it's pressing, but here bishop takes f3, and then things like pawn takes e5 maybe. I don't know, g4, bishop e2. Sure. Queen to d3, queen to a6. Yeah, I get it. Maybe rook dg8. I mean, definitely rook dg8, king h2 is an improvement, right? Or queen f3 maybe. I don't know, but it's worth looking. It's just worth looking at where the tactical misstep was. Once this gets open, this gets worse. D4 is an idea. D4, queen d3. Yeah, d4. So yeah, this I guess we could also spend time. I think it's really an interesting situation because it does show how efficiently black can basically get this attack started. G5, h5 here, h3, g5, d3. bishop takes, pawn to g4. I don't know. I think this ends up looking, this ends up looking really dangerous for black. More accurate was bishop to e2, g takes h3, and then maybe g3. Maneuvering on this king side is tricky. But this h3, which generated a hook for black to attack with, that was not the right play. Yeah, although I guess the real decision was opening up this H file. So here, basically bishop e2 doesn't allow the H file to get opened up in the same way. G takes h3, g3. Now white's in a fairly good position. But yeah, this is this is better for white. So the error here, the decisive tactical error, was h takes g4. Other moves here, bishop e2, this is fine for white. This open file is really what kills white here. Even if white makes it the g file that's the open file, so like g takes h6, I think white still has tactically resourceful defenses here. You need to calculate it out pretty clearly, but this provides white some level of defense. But it really shows that opening up the H file, which is a file where white can't effectively defend at all. I mean, basically none of white's defensive pieces can reach the H file. So giving the rook this open H file, giving the queen this open H file, the combination of those two is basically unplayable for unplayable for white. So anyways, this ends up being good for white. D4 is an idea. And I don't know, but the real error comes from pawn takes g4. So in terms of looking at how, if white manages, if your opponent manages to get this aggressive an attack on your king side, I would definitely use this as kind of like a lower level like instruction. Don't open a file where you can't have where you have no effective defense. White should see h takes g3 and h takes g4 and h takes g4. And realize that there's nothing that can really defend this H file and the doubled, the battery of the queen and the rook on this H file once this gets opened up. So, anyways, this led to a really rough situation for white. The error was, basically in exchange for the aggressive open king side that's been, very valuable to white in this situation. Black gets an open king side on white. So, white opened up black's queen side. This king has poor king safety. Black basically uses those moves to get a very efficient attack going. Everything's basically going fine for white except for this, this tactically inaccurate pawn takes g4. If something like bishop e2 here is, that's better. G takes h3, g3 potentially, king h2. Overall, this should be good for white. Should play out pretty well for white. So yeah, this is the this is the outcome. I think this ends up being good for white. And at the end of the day, g3 and white is fine. The real error was opening up the H file. H file when the rook is on h8 can be dangerous against a kingside castled king. That is kind of intuitive, but this game illustrates pretty well how badly off white was once he allowed this open H file against this king. Anyways, interesting situation. Interesting situation, and that's what's going on there. Cool. On to the next one, Sam Sejwani's game. Thank you very much for being here, Sam Sejwani, and this showing me what the Stonewall Attack is really helpful. So thank you very much for sending that over, and interesting stuff. Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. You're absolutely right about that. You're right. You're completely right, Sam Sejwani. having the open H file was the worst. Opening the G file was also bad, Sam Sejuani. That's definitely true. But there were tactical opportunities that involved bishop to E2 there, that that basically resulted in white not even having to open up the G file. But opening up the H file, really was fatal for white in that case. Anyways, bishop to C4, bishop to C5. All right, cool. Interesting, Sam Sejuani. So this is the Guaco piano game. This should basically be pretty good for white. Knight F6, D3, D4, pawn takes, and bishop B4, and basically white's fine. This leads to somewhere near equality. But white has a huge center, and that's basically what white plays for in this opening with the early C3 and D4. There are some dangerous, this Greco attack, there are some dangerous situations that can occur out of this. Here with D4, there's some weird pins, like here knight takes E4 becomes a really tactically sharp position. I think it's not quite playable for black, if I remember correctly, but I know that this turns into a really dangerous thing. Yeah, well, no, I mean, that definitely happens, Sam Sejuani. Definitely is, it's basically an interesting situation about that, Sam Sejuani. Like, there's many times when you get practical compensation off of an inferior move. I mean, if everyone was always playing, if everyone was only playing the most engine accepted games, it was basically about, so knight takes E4, castles, knight takes C3. There's some crazy tactics in this. This is another example where, I just knew that the theory was more than, there's extensive theory in C3, D4, pawn takes, bishop to B4. This basically ends up being a, this ends up being a super complicated tactical situation. But I think D4, pawn takes D4, bishop to B4, knight C3, castles. This ends up being an issue for white. Castles, pawn takes C3, knight takes E4. They're basically, white, in order to play this opening, white needs to learn a lot of theory. That's fine. Lots of openings require white to learn a lot of theory. But this is definitely one of them. Like that rook sacrifice line you're talking about, Sam Sejuani, you really have to go through a book or some type of, more detailed opening resource to make sure that you're playing this correctly. My decision here was always just to play D3. D3 is considered better than C3, I guess, based on the opening. Maybe not. If I play D3, it says D3 is best. If I play C3, then C3, it says C3 is a book move and gives a better eval. So, I don't know, whatever. I play D3 here. But D3 requires, basically a lot less theory knowledge. With D3, it's usually knight F6, bishop G5, bishop H4, bishop G3. B4 is interesting. Yeah, white has a bunch of different options here. B4 is good. B4 is the Evans Gambit. Evans Gambit is interesting. But C3, D4, pawn takes, bishop B4, and overall here white's looking fine. It requires knowledge of moves like knight takes E4, in which case there's a lot of theory. Like you can see basically, if you look at this line, right? You look at the knight C3 line, and then knight takes E4. It's a fairly narrow tree. So if you look at this, you can see castles, bishop takes C3, D5, bishop F6, rook E1, knight E7, and basically out until about move 13 or 14, maybe even further. The best move is so clear. So if you look at this situation, right? If you look at this situation, you can sort of determine that here, white doesn't really have a whole lot of latitude. Like, if you look at this, if you look at this move, basically c3, d4 to bishop to b4, after knight c3, white's best move is determined, pretty much every move. So you really need to know this theory. If you're interested in playing knight c3 against bishop to b4 here, you need to know every move in this order. Basically bishop takes c3, d5, rook e1. Because if you look at the master game, basically there's not, there's just not much play there outside of this main line, and a lot of the sidelines are inferior for white. Still here, white's not looking like fantastic. I mean, this is the most commonly played line, and white still, has a minus 0.5 eval. But I think here you can play like rook e1 and have kind of an interesting attack at least. You've sacrificed a pawn in this main line, but I don't know. I mean, you sacrificed the e4 pawn from really early on. If black plays this early knight takes e4, it's just there's theory knowledge required in this. d3 is often a simpler way to play. So yeah, there's multiple ways that this can play out. c3, d4 is definitely okay. But yeah, Sam Sejuani, depending on how much opening knowledge you're willing to put in, this opening can play out fine for white. d3 is much simpler and not objectively worse. That's why I always played it. So bishop to g5, knight to c3, knight d5. Your tactics out of d3 are very self-explanatory. And also c3 d4 is a big center, but it still leads to kind of the same points of attack. This d5 is still going to be potentially played by black, and I don't know. It's up to you. We could go through this theory a little bit more, but really, there's enough ins and outs of this open. I bet there are whole books written on this, on this particular opening. So, here, I don't know. d5, bishop d3. Overall, here, this particular, this knight takes c3 is an error, right? Knight takes c3 isn't playable because of the queen threatening the knight and the h2 square. But yeah, all of the ins and outs of this you have to know if you're willing to play this opening. Yeah, no, I mean, it's up to you. I like sharp play too, Sam Sejuani, but the thing about this sharp play is that it's very well established theory. So if you understand, if you understand theory here, right? The issue with if you understand the theory, then it leads to sharp play. But the point is, the theory isn't real. The theory is determined, right? I mean, it's not as if the theory's new and both players are sort of playing a chess game that's unexplored. It sort of turns into sharp tactics into memorized theory because this opening line has been played over so many times. Like, if you're looking at this, right, white has very few opportunities to get off of the main line. Once knight takes e4, or sorry, here knight c3, and then the immediate knight takes e4. Basically white has a very obvious first choice for about the next 10 moves or so. No. I mean, no, I think it's great. I think if you're willing to put in the time to learn that theory, you can get great openings as white. So I don't want to discourage you from doing that. Like, definitely, if you're willing to put the time in and learn the theory here, feel free. It's just that I don't know it particularly well, to be completely honest, because I always played the d3 lines, where it turns into an earlier thing. But this basically turns into into a complicated game. d6, bishop g5, bishop takes, knight takes, h6. Overall here, white's doing fine. So anyways, interesting game, Sam Sejuani. Let's play it out to the end. This happened. castling before knight takes e4. And then you get this very early trap of knight takes c3, and you play queen c2 and win, basically a very solid material advantage. What's the idea of rook e4? Rook e4 in the sideline. I want to make sure I know. Rook e4 here. Yeah, I would say double rooks probably. I mean, white's working to kind of hold on to that rook on e4, so. After this, white gets back the piece. So yeah, white can do a full in this sideline, right? I mean, all the sidelines are really booked up on this. So castles, d5, rook e1, and then rook e1 here, and basically pressure being placed on e7. This ends up winning back that piece for white. This is a prepared line. If you look at this, there's still 48 games. F6, rook e3, c6. Look at this. I mean, basically this, into move 20, there's 21 games. I mean, there's a lot of different, there's a lot of different lines here. With queen e1, with g6, basically white's looking fine. Yeah, exactly. White can create the Alekhines gun structure, exactly. So, anyways, very interesting situation. I think you did great, and you basically really capitalized on the win of that h7 pawn. This situation plays out pretty well for white, Sam Sejuani. Once you get that h file open, white has just way better attacking chances. And here black played a fatal error. Bishop takes c4, and then there's just nothing that black can do. So overall, great demonstration of that game, Sam Sejuani. Thank you very much for sending that game, and yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you for sending that over, and feel free to keep sending them. I'm always happy to look at them, and that is yeah, very interesting stuff. Thanks. Yeah, no, you can. You can make sacrifices in that opening. That Alekhines gun wins back that piece where you sacrifice the knight. I mean, there's many things like that. The one warning that I would, yeah, no, cool. Yeah, bishop takes knight is good. On f6. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a really sharp position, Sam Sejuani. I think you played it great. I think capitalizing on that knight takes c3 error from black was the correct move. But my argument there is really just just if you're gonna play that opening, really do the theory behind it. There's a lot of pre-established theory in that opening, which makes it difficult to play. It's very sharp, so I think that those sharp lines could be really helpful for you. But overkill on that. Yeah, no, and that exactly right, and that happens in that opening a lot. You could see on what I was talking about with the opening tree is basically like, there's 50 games, and of those games, 49 of them will have the same move, and that move is the correct move. So you have to know your theory on that one very deep. But if you do know the theory on that opening deep, and you have time to study that theory, I think it could be a great fit for you in terms of opening. Okay. But yeah, so really interesting points. Really interesting points, Sam Sejuani. I really appreciate it, and Yeah, no, exactly. You're totally right about that, Sam Sejwani. And my piece of advice on this is, just be careful with that. It's a really fine opening. There's no problems for white. Just be on the over prepared side for that one, because there's a lot of pre-established lines and a lot of traps that people know. So just be careful about that. Um, I don't know. I mostly if you want to play on if you want to play me, I'm gonna play that tournament on Monday that Aphelion is setting up, Master at Luck Games. So I'll be happy to play then. I don't know. Everyone else plays their viewers. I'm sort of like whatever. I'd rather teach. Uh, so yeah, this is interesting. Matyop is playing an interesting opening. F6. This is not something that I know. Knight F3, E5. I'm surprised that this is playable. I guess this does turn into the Rui Lopez with this F6 move, but this is pretty interesting. Yeah, that's what I'm doing now, Master. But yeah, F6 is unusual. This translates into a yeah, really weird Nimzowitsch game. Knight G5 is better than Bishop to G5 here. With Knight G5, H6 can't be played because of Bishop Queen to H5, and on Bishop to E7, Knight to D5, I guess, or H4. Yeah, I'm a national master at Luck Games. I'm a United States national master, life master. Bishop G5, Bishop takes, Knight takes, Knight E7, Queen takes E7. But overall here, I think white is white is fine. But yeah, this sort of white needs to play careful. Pawn takes, Knight F3, D6, Bishop G5, Bishop takes E7. And basically, I think with straightforward development, white is fine. So Bishop E2, castles. Black is, black's just worse. Black's just better. So where are the missteps? I think basically, white making developing moves. So this game is basically about tempo. If you understand kind of the concepts behind tempo, you can sort of see why white loses his advantage here. White basically loses his edge by playing developing moves with the idea of trading. Bishop to G5 gets played, Bishop takes E7, Knight takes E7, and white ends up in a situation where basically white can't basically white is playing these moves and trading pieces. So every time white trades a developed piece, he's basically losing tempo because black is recapturing with developing moves, and by this point black has 3 developed pieces and white only has 1. So that's the main concept in this game. The whole F6 thing is kind of unusual. I can't imagine that that's very good for black. This seems to just worsen black's king safety, but white playing these moves with the idea of like basically this right now, white is making moves to basically move this knight forward and trade off bishops. Like it's not this. It's important to think of this trade in like the bigger picture context. So like Bishop G5, Bishop E7, Bishop takes, Knight takes, and now it's white to move again, but now he doesn't have this natural development, and so here basically knight to e7, knight to d5, bishop e2. Anyways, white's fine. Basically black is fine. White has used too many moves, trading off pieces. And as a result, black ends up in a situation where he has, weak development. Or white has weak development and black has an aggressive attack on the king side. So e4, knight c6. And white's doing fine. This ended up trading out in a crazy way. Basically, a lot of errors for both sides here. Black just lost the queen, right? He lost the queen on g5, and I don't know. And the white basically recaptured and won in this position. So overall, tactics were kind of where this game was decided. Black plays an unusual opening. White, but I think in terms of instructive, basically it's easy for me to say, okay, just do more tactics. Like, it's the right answer, do more tactics. But the thematic concept that I think white is misplaying here is he's developing to trade pieces. When you develop, you want to play to squares that will control squares, not squares that will secure a trade of an undeveloped piece for black versus an undeveloped piece for white. Just in terms of time spent, this is not particularly good. I think bishops to c4 could be good. Maybe knight to d5 could be good. But overall, white is, white does well here by just playing straightforward developing moves. Moves like bishop to e3, moves like bishop to c4, moves like bishop to b5. And overall here, white's doing, just fine. So that's my, that's my argument on this game. I think that's the most instructive point, is just playing developing moves to trade off pieces is really kind of a waste of time. And as a result, black was able to get quick development on the king side while white remained underdeveloped. If white was developing, he traded off all of his developed pieces immediately, so there wasn't really much to do. So anyways, thank you very much for sending the game, Matt Yop. As always, I think sticking with a good tactical training session is the best play and the best move forward for you. F6 Nimzowitsch defense. I think basically allowing this F file to get open for black seems to do nothing but compromise his king safety. D5, knight e5. This is way better for white, Sam Sejuani, for sure. I agree. You're making some very good points here. F6 is not a good move for black. Pretty much in any opening. It's running into this undeveloped knight. So that's the thing. It's basically taking away this knight's natural developing square, and limiting the queen's mobility. And this is in the case where it doesn't trade off. In the case where it does trade off, it just worsens black's kingside safety. Knight f6 is a response. Just doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. And bishop to g5, bishop takes. Overall here, I think white's going to end up being basically behind. These two developing moves came to nothing, right? All the moves that you've spent developing this knight and developing this bishop go away when you trade off those pieces. Now black's got a big developing edge because white traded off his developed pieces. I hope I'm explaining it clearly, but basically, white making developing moves, spending time on developing moves just to get traded off, doesn't make any sense. That's not something that's beneficial to white. So, anyways, overall, black's able to secure a time advantage, able to secure a developmental advantage, and be in good shape. That's my point, is, basically what ends up happening here is white ends up spending time to develop black's kingside knight. So here we're sitting in a position where white has, you know, a 2-pawn lead in basically all the different options available to him. So what he does with that, which is inefficient, is he moves his bishop to a square and then trades off the bishop immediately and brings the knight forward. So basically white has allocated a move here to develop black's kingside knight. And then, you know, and then basically trades off this knight. So as a result of basically white's last, you know, 3 or 4 moves or so, is this queen getting developed to here, this bishop getting developed to here, and white's position not improving at all. That's what it really is, you know, at the end of the day. So in assessing developing moves, you know, assess whether the developing moves will be sustained. If they're not sustained, then there's not. Yeah, probably queen d2 may be a better response to that. I just think the whole idea was kind of not. Yeah, I mean, at least with queen d2, you're ending up with pieces that are developed. Bishop g5, queen takes g5. I mean, this runs into its own issues, like h6 and the queen, you know, and the knight goes back to f3, I think. I mean, maybe knight to d5 is better, but knight to f3 and basically white is, you know, white is fine. So anyways, the main point here is just, you know, don't spend time just to trade off the pieces that you've spent time on. It doesn't make sense. Anyways, continuing on this, I guess I would say the ideas could contain things like, you know, basically better ideas for white, develop to e3, you know, keep the knight on the d5 post, don't trade it off for e7, but playing moves that trade and move your opponent's pieces forward doesn't really make sense, you know, as a general concept. You know, if you compare this position on move 9 versus this position on move 5. So these are the positions. This is the position on move 5. This bishop's undeveloped. This knight is here. Versus this position on move 9. This bishop is gone and this bishop is gone. Nothing has changed for white, but multiple moves have been, you know, changed for black. So that's the improvement. Anyways, on to the next game. Let's take a look. And this one is Pravilo's game. Thank you very much for hanging out, Pravilo. Sorry it took a bit to get to this, but let's take a look. Take a look at this game for black. D4, D5, early knight C3. Knight C3 in the queen's pawn opening. I think this is you know, Chigorin variation, right? Is what it's called. But basically, you know, this blocks off this this natural development of the C pawn to C4. E4 is kind of interesting here. Black Martimer Gambit, right? G6, E3, Bishop G7, Bishop D3, castles, C5. Here, I think basically black is in fine position. You know, this, you know, there's a defensive play on D5. I don't know. I think this is basically, you know, fine for black. No real problems. Looks good. So I don't know. I guess here I would probably aim for C5. I think C5 looks pretty interesting. The main move here is G6. But if white plays knight to C3, then black gets to play early, you know, early moves that resemble the white side moves from the queen's pawn game. So knight F3, G6, Bishop F4, Bishop G7. This all looks fine. Yeah. Cool. This isn't what happened in the game. In the game, both players developed their knights quickly, maintained symmetry, and white's got a slight one move advantage. Bishop to G7 is probably better. Bishop to F5 is also playable. But yeah, it's up. You know, it's really up to black here. But definitely, I would aim for development over E6. One of the key differences, and this sort of ties into the beginning, the beginning games that we were looking at out of the Slav, is one of the problems with bishop to f5, and Mikey was the one who brought this up, but basically one of the developments of bishop to f5 is, this is helpful for black, basically, right? But sometimes an issue that can come up when black plays bishop to f5 is queen to b3 with a fork on the d5 pawn and the b7 pawn. If black plays to f5, then then basically this threat on c2, this ends up being pretty strong for black. So this threat on c2 I think is overall not that basically not that bad. This is good for black. There's not really much of a response for white to play here. The main move that can be used to refute bishop f5 is queen to b3 with threats on the b7 pawn. Here, because the knight is placed on c3, that's not an option. So bishop to f2 is a legitimate, bishop threatening c2 is a legitimate threat, and bishop to f5 is a legitimate move. So for that reason, I would definitely recommend developing to bishop f5 before playing e6. That's a big improvement for black versus what happened. e6 is also solid. It'll lead to the same positions that black normally gets, where his light-scored bishop is underdeveloped. But you might as well play bishop f5, get it to a good diagonal, and then be ready to play e6 and hold up the, basically hold up the situation. Play e6, play bishop to b4, and black will be good in that case. Bishop to d6 is the move here. You'd need to do something to tactically defend c7. Okay, all right, I see what happened. So let's go through this front to back and determine sort of what happened. So basically, I think maintaining symmetry here was probably not the right idea. I think here instead something like g6 is better. Knight c6. So there's basically a complicated situation with the c pawn and the knight to c3, knight to c6 moves in the queen's pawn openings. c4 and c6 are frequently valuable resources for either attacking with a move like c5 or defending with a move like c6, like in the Slav. Probably not that much reason to play c6 in this opening, because basically there's nothing to defend. White's not pressing on the d5 pawn, so c6 never really needs to get played. But knight c6 blocks in this potential c5 resource. The best play here is probably g6, bishop g7, c5. I think that'll play out better for black. I think that's a better choice, and so I'd recommend that. Now with this symmetry, h6, g5, e6, I would play bishop to f5 and continue development over e6 first. But either way, e6, c5, sure, that works fine. But something to do with the c5 resource. Losing that resource, throwing out that resource with knight to c6. E6, c5, that also works fine. But the main point is that black should do something to challenge the center here, because white has not challenged the center in the normal way with c4. So basically black is in some respects playing something similar to the white side, is what I'm saying. So black's playing something and then white's playing something. So knight f6, knight c6, and overall here black's doing better than white here. Knight b5 is fine, and it's a reasonable threat, but the response is bishop to d6. Also here, a6. A6 is a proactive defensive move. I'm normally not a big fan of those, but it would prevent the knight from coming in, and it could lead to a later expansion, a6, b5, b4 at some point maybe. But that also shuts down this attack. Now bishop d6 is forced, and anything else wins this pawn on c7 for white. So knight takes c7, and now basically black is white is fine. Knight takes c2 is knight takes c2 is playable here. This hangs knight takes c2, If you play c3 instead, this leads to no problems for white. Knight can't play to either d3 or c2. So c3 is superior. Yeah, white breaks open black's kingside here. Or wait. And then basically white plays g4, which is a big tactical error, and then king g2, which hangs the rook. So overall, Pravilo, I think you're headed in the right direction. I think a lot of the things that you're doing are correct. I saw you got to a new rating high the other day. I'm super happy for you. I think that's great. And I really hope you keep up tactical study and all the work that you're doing there. But yeah, at the end of the day, this game mainly comes down to tactics. In terms of tactical improvements, the first one is knight takes c7 shouldn't be allowed. Bishop to d6 refutes it, or prevents it. So that's the first one. And then basically, queen to a4 allows for the knight takes c2 opportunity, which you get, and you win an exchange off of that. Here I would just take the rook, solidify your material lead if you can. And then, yeah, basically, there's some tactical misplays here by your opponent. So bishop takes e1 was allowed, and definitely shouldn't have been. So overall, this situation comes down to tactics. It's basically it's a tactical game. Like many games under 1200, it was determined on tactical concepts. But I would say that from a positional perspective, the things to consider, basically knight to c6 blocks off a key resource in queen's pawn games. White did it, so you're not as badly off doing it here as you could potentially be. But knight to c6 blocks off the c pawn as a resource in queen's pawn games. Here also, bishop f5 is a fine developing move. It doesn't run into the normal queen to b3. So those are the two tactical takeaways from this. Those are the two recommendations that I would make. And with bishop to f5, black is fine. That's my recommendation in terms of positional play. The rest of the things came down to tactics. The tactical moves that you were playing seemed to be, they were good. You found a few good tactics in it, but there were some that your opponent had access to, and there were some that you had access to that you didn't, make the most of those opportunities. So, my main recommendation for you, Pravilo, is just to continue on with your tactical study. With your good tactical study, you should basically be fine. It's your quickest way of improving. It's not going to be overnight. It's really going to be kind of a sustained thing. If you keep up the tactical study, your rating will improve, your strength in chess will improve, and it's where your games are getting decided at this point. So it wouldn't make sense to put time into studying something that doesn't lead to a practical application in a game. So that's what I would say. I think you should do that, Pravilo, and keep up your keep up the good work. Basically, what you're doing makes sense. I think you have the potential to improve a lot. I think if you keep playing, doing your tactical study, I think that's going to send you in the right direction, and that's where this game was decided. Multiple big swings of tactics we can see on this reporting chart. Basically, lots of multiple point moves in either direction. Basically you want to cut out these movements as much as you can. You want to keep the eval looking basically like this flat line that the game starts with, and once you do that, you'll be a much more highly rated player. There's a lot of opportunities for you in the level that you're playing at. So really make sure that you do your tactical study so you can capitalize on those opportunities. Thanks a lot for sending the game, Pravilo. Thanks very much for being here. Thanks everyone for being here, and yeah, the next stream is at 9:35 p.m. Eastern tonight. I really appreciate everyone being here. I really appreciate everyone sending in material, and feel free to send in as much more as you'd like. I'm definitely interested in continuing, basically continuing to look over games. I'm shifting a little bit more towards an instructional direction. I think that's probably better. I think that might be more interesting for people whose game it isn't. But yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Thanks very much for being here. And yeah, no problem, Privilo. The main focus is, I think, something you already know, which is just focus on tactics. But there were a few positional ideas there. I think it's worth evaluating knight c6 and how you might want to be playing the c pawn versus the knight c6 move in queen's pawn games in the future. But yeah, thanks very much for sending the game. Never worry about missing any streams. Everything's available for free video on demand for 14 days on Twitch and then forever in some places on YouTube, including my YouTube channel. Yeah, thanks very much for everyone for being here. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate the time spent, and thanks. Have a good one, guys. I'll see you. Hopefully, see you tonight, 9:35 p.m. Eastern stream. Thanks very much for being here. Have a good one. Bye.